Before he says a single word about your home, before he even compliments the couch or asks who did the paint color, his mind has already formed an entire impression of who you are. It happens in the first 8 seconds, sometimes less. And here's the strange part. Most women spend hours preparing their appearance before a date, but almost no thought on what their home is silently saying the moment he walks through the door. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what a man notices, often without even realizing he's noticing it, the moment he steps into your space. Some of these will surprise you because they have nothing to do with how expensive or tidy things look, and everything to do with something much deeper. Welcome back to Psychology on Love. Your home is not just a place you live. Psychologically speaking, it's an extension of your nervous system, your emotional patterns, and the way you relate to yourself when nobody's watching. And a man, whether he realizes it or not, reads all of that in the first few minutes he's inside your space. Stay with me through this, because by the end, you're going to look at your own home completely differently, and you might even walk through your front door tonight and see it the way he does. Let's start with the very first thing, the thing that happens before he even fully steps inside, and that's the entryway. Psychologists who study environmental behavior call this the threshold effect, and it's incredibly powerful because the entryway is the very first data point his brain receives about you, before he's even had a chance to see the rest of the space. Is there a place to take off shoes, or does he have to awkwardly figure out where to stand? Is there a small moment of order, a mat, a hook for keys, a bowl for things, or is it chaos the second the door opens, mail piled up, shoes scattered everywhere he has to step around? This isn't about being a neat freak. A messy entryway once in a while means nothing. What his brain is actually reading is whether there is intention in how you receive people into your world. An entryway that has even the smallest sense of order says something quiet but important. It says, I thought about what it feels like for someone to arrive here. And that single detail, more than almost anything else, shapes the emotional tone of everything that follows. Think about the last time you walked into somewhere unfamiliar, a friend's new apartment, a restaurant you'd never been to before. Within moments, before anyone said a word, you already had a feeling about the place. That feeling wasn't logical, it was instinctive, and it happened almost entirely because of that first threshold moment. This is why interior designers and hospitality professionals obsess over entryways, more than almost any other part of a space, because they understand something most people never consciously think about. The entry sets the emotional key that the rest of the experience will be played in. If it starts on a note of chaos, everything after it is interpreted through that lens. If it starts on a note of calm intention, even small imperfections later feel forgivable, sometimes even charming. The second thing he notices, almost immediately after that, is lighting. This one sounds strange until you understand the psychology behind it. Human brains are wired, evolutionarily, to associate certain kinds of light with safety and certain kinds with alertness. Harsh, overhead, fluorescent-style lighting activates a subtle low-grade stress response, even if nobody consciously registers why they feel slightly on edge in a space. Warm, layered lighting, lamps instead of just ceiling lights, a few soft sources instead of one glaring one, activates the opposite response, comfort, ease, a sense of being somewhere that was built for relaxing rather than just functioning. This is why some homes feel instantly comforting the second you walk in, and others feel strangely cold, even if they're spotless and beautifully decorated. A man might never consciously think the word lighting, but his body will feel the difference between a space that invites him to stay and a space that quietly tells him to stay alert. Warmth in lighting, more than almost any single design choice, sets the emotional temperature of the entire visit. There's a reason candlelit dinners feel more intimate than dinners under bright kitchen lighting, and it isn't just romantic tradition. Low, warm light physically softens facial features, slows the nervous system slightly, and reduces the subtle hypervigilance that bright, clinical lighting can trigger without anyone realizing it. A home lit primarily with a few warm lamps, rather than one overhead light doing all the work, sends an unconscious signal that this space was designed for living in, not simply for illuminating tasks. It's a small choice, one most people never think twice about, and yet it shapes the entire emotional undertone of a visit before a single conversation even begins. The third thing, and this one is deeply revealing, is the presence or absence of personal photographs and mementos. Not staged, magazine-style photography, but real, imperfect photos. You at your best friend's wedding laughing too hard, an old photo with your parents, a childhood picture on the fridge. A concert ticket stub someone kept for no logical reason at all. When a man sees these things, his mind registers something important almost instantly, that this is a life fully lived, with real relationships, real history, real people who matter enough to be displayed. A home with none of these things, one that looks more like a hotel room than a life, sends a very different, often unconscious message, that either this person keeps others at a careful distance, or hasn't allowed herself to feel settled enough anywhere to let a life accumulate around her. This isn't a judgment. Plenty of people are simply private, or minimalist, or still building that sense of home. But psychologically, personal artifacts are one of the strongest nonverbal signals of emotional openness that exist, because they show that you're not afraid to let someone see evidence of who you actually love and who has loved you. There's something worth understanding here about vulnerability, because a photograph on a shelf is a small act of exposure. It says, "These people mattered enough to me that I want to see their faces every day, and I'm comfortable enough with that to let a stranger see it too." Men often can't articulate why a home with visible personal history feels warmer than one without it, but the underlying psychological mechanism is simple. Evidence of being loved by others is one of the strongest indicators of being safe to love. It's an unconscious form of social proof, not in a superficial sense, but in the deepest, most human sense possible. The fourth thing he notices is something most people would never think to name, and that's how the space smells, but not in the way you might expect. It's not about wearing perfume or lighting a candle right before he arrives. It's about whether the smell feels natural or artificially masked. A home that smells like it's been aggressively perfumed right before someone walked in sometimes triggers an unconscious suspicion, almost like something's being covered up, even if nothing actually is. Whereas a space that simply smells clean, lived in, maybe faintly like something cooked recently or fresh laundry, registers as authentic. Scent is processed by the oldest part of the brain, tied directly to memory and instinct, faster than any visual information. This is why a man can't always explain why a space feels welcoming or slightly off, but his body knows before his mind catches up. Smell memory works differently than every other sense we have. A visual memory can fade or distort over years, but a scent can transport someone back to a specific moment in childhood instantly, fully, without any conscious effort at all. This is why the smell of a home lingers in someone's memory of you far longer than they'd expect, long after the visit itself has been forgotten in detail. A home that smells authentically like itself, rather than like an attempt to impress, tends to be remembered far more fondly, because authenticity, even in something as small as scent, registers as safety. The fifth thing, and this one matters more than most people realize, is the kitchen, specifically whether it looks used or untouched. A kitchen that shows real signs of use, a few dishes drying, spices that have clearly been opened and used, a favorite mug out on the counter, tells a story about nourishment, about someone who takes care of her own basic needs consistently. On a deep, often unconscious level, men read this as a signal about capacity for care, not in an old-fashioned, someone should cook for me kind of way, but in a much more basic psychological sense. A person who feeds herself, who maintains some rhythm of nourishing her own body, often signals emotional self-sufficiency. A kitchen that looks completely untouched, sterile, more decorative than functional, can sometimes unconsciously suggest disconnection from the basic rituals of self-care. Though, of course, this isn't universally true, and plenty of people simply don't cook much and are perfectly nurturing in other ways. Still, on a primal level, a lived-in kitchen tends to register as warmth, and warmth is one of the very first things the nervous system searches for in an unfamiliar space. Food, historically and psychologically, has always been tied to trust and belonging. Sharing a meal is one of the oldest bonding rituals in human history, and a kitchen that shows evidence of that ritual being practiced regularly, even alone, carries an echo of that same warmth. It's not about being a great cook. It's about the small, repeated act of choosing to nourish yourself, day after day, which quietly reflects a deeper relationship with self-worth than most people ever consciously connect to something as simple as a used cutting board sitting in the sink. The sixth thing he notices, often without consciously naming it, is whether there's any visible sense of space made for another person. This doesn't mean literally decorating for a partner who doesn't exist yet. That would feel strange and performative. It's subtler than that. It's about whether the home feels like a closed fortress built entirely around one person's habits, every inch optimized for a life that has no room left to expand, or whether there's a natural openness to it, a couch that could fit too comfortably, a second coffee mug in the cabinet, a home that feels complete on its own but not sealed shut. Psychologically, spaces that feel emotionally closed, overly controlled, everything in its precise, unmovable place, can sometimes signal a subconscious resistance to letting someone else's presence disrupt the system. Whereas a home with a bit of natural flexibility in it often reflects someone who is genuinely open to sharing her life, not desperately, but comfortably. This distinction matters because there's a real difference between a home built as a fortress and a home built as a foundation. A fortress protects. A foundation supports something that can grow. Neither one is wrong. Self-protection through difficult seasons of life is completely valid. But men, often without realizing why, pick up on which version they've walked into, and it quietly shapes how comfortable they feel imagining themselves as part of that space in the future. The seventh thing, and this one is almost universally underestimated, is the presence of living things, plants in particular. A home with plants that are actually alive, not necessarily perfectly maintained, but clearly cared for, sends an incredibly strong psychological signal. Caring for a living thing consistently over time without any immediate reward is one of the clearest non-verbal indicators of nurturing capacity that exists. It shows patience. It shows the ability to commit to something small and unglamorous simply because it deserves care. Dead or dying plants, on the other hand, or the complete absence of anything living in the space, can sometimes create a subtle, hard-to-name feeling that something in the environment isn't being tended to. Again, this isn't a rule carved in stone. Some people simply don't have a green thumb, but the psychological association between living plants and a nurturing, attentive presence runs surprisingly deep. There's an entire field of research around biophilic design, the idea that human beings are wired to feel calmer and more at ease around living, growing things, even small ones. A single healthy plant on a windowsill does more to soften a space emotionally than an entire wall of expensive artwork ever could, because it represents ongoing care rather than a one-time purchase. It whispers something quiet but powerful, that this is a person who shows up, day after day, for something small that depends on her. The eighth thing, and this one is more emotional than physical, is the bedroom, or more specifically, the energy of it if he ever sees it. Not in a sexual sense, but in terms of whether it feels like a sanctuary or an afterthought. A bed that's made even simply soft textures, a sense of calm in that specific room, signals something important about how you treat your own rest, your own private world, the one space that exists purely for you and isn't performed for guests. A bedroom that feels neglected, cluttered in a chaotic rather than lived-in way, sometimes unconsciously suggests that self-care has taken a back seat to everything external. This single room, more than almost any other space in the home, tends to reveal how someone treats themselves when absolutely no one else is watching. And that honesty is something people register on an instinctive level, even if they'd never say it out loud. The bedroom carries a particular kind of psychological weight because it's the one room in the entire home that has no audience most of the time. Every other space can be, and often is, shaped by the awareness that others might see it. The bedroom, by contrast, is usually arranged purely for yourself, which is exactly why it reveals so much. It's the room where your true baseline standard of self-care lives, uninfluenced by performance or expectation. And on some level, everyone who ever sees it, even briefly, understands that intuitively. The ninth thing worth mentioning is sound, something almost nobody thinks about consciously, yet it shapes mood more powerfully than most visual elements combined. A home with some form of gentle ambient sound, quiet music playing, the low hum of something comforting, feels different from a home in dead, heavy silence, and different again from a home with jarring, chaotic noise. Silence isn't inherently bad, plenty of peaceful homes are quiet. But there's a difference between calm quiet and empty quiet, and most people can feel that difference the moment they walk in, even if they couldn't explain what tipped them off. The 11th thing, often completely overlooked, is what's visible on shelves and surfaces beyond the obvious decoration, specifically books, notebooks, or anything that hints at an inner life. A shelf with a few worn paperbacks, a journal left out, even a half-finished puzzle on a side table, tells a man something quiet but significant, that this person has a rich internal world she returns to, hobbies and curiosities that exist independent of anyone watching. A home that's entirely stripped of these small traces, all surfaces empty, everything put away out of sight, can sometimes unconsciously read as a person who's always performing readiness rather than actually living. This isn't about clutter. It's about evidence of an inner life that continues quietly, whether or not anyone else is around to witness it. The 12th thing, and this one is easy to miss because it's more about behavior than object, is how you react in the moment he first walks in. Do you apologize immediately, scrambling to explain the mess before he's even looked around? Or do you let the space simply exist as it is, calm, unbothered, without a nervous disclaimer attached to it? This single reaction, more than the state of the home itself, often tells a man far more about your relationship with your own environment than the environment ever could on its own. A woman who doesn't feel the need to over-explain or apologize for her space signals a kind of quiet self-acceptance, the same self-acceptance that tends to show up in every other part of a relationship too, in how she handles disagreements, how she receives compliments, how she sets boundaries. The home is simply the first place that self-acceptance becomes visible, often before either of you has said much of anything at all. The 10th thing, and this one ties everything together, is simply whether the home feels calm or chaotic in its overall energy, independent of how expensive or trendy anything in it is. This is the most important point in this entire video, so listen closely. Men, and honestly people in general, are far less impressed by luxury than most people assume. Expensive furniture, perfectly curated interior design, none of that creates the emotional impression that actually matters. What creates impact is coherence, a sense that this space reflects an actual person, with actual rhythms, actual care, and actual intention, rather than either total chaos or sterile showroom perfection. A modest apartment that feels warm, lived in, and cared for will almost always leave a stronger emotional impression than a stunning, expensive home that feels cold, empty, or performative. Because what a man is truly reading underneath all of these small individual signals is one single question his subconscious is quietly trying to answer. Is this a person who has built a life she actually feels good living in? Or is this a space built to be seen, rather than truly lived? This is the deeper truth behind everything we've talked about today. None of this is really about photographs, or plants, or lighting, or entryways, individually. Each of those things is simply a small piece of evidence pointing toward one larger, unconscious question that every person, man or woman, is quietly asking the moment they enter someone else's space. Does this person feel safe here? Does this person take care of herself here? Is this a home, or is this simply a container someone happens to sleep in? And the answer to that question, whether we consciously realize it or not, shapes the emotional undertone of every interaction that follows long after the visit ends. Here's something important to understand before we go further, because this isn't about performing perfection for a first impression. In fact, trying too hard to stage every element specifically to impress someone often backfires, because authenticity is its own signal, and people, whether they can articulate it or not, can usually feel the difference between a home that's genuinely lived in and cared for, and one that's been artificially arranged purely for effect. The goal was never to create a flawless showroom. The goal is coherence between who you actually are and the environment you've built around yourself. That coherence, more than any single design choice, is what actually creates a lasting emotional impression. It's also worth saying this clearly because it matters. None of this is about needing to have the perfect home before anyone is allowed to see it. Life is messy. Some weeks the dishes pile up, the plants get neglected, the entryway becomes a landing zone for everything you didn't have energy to deal with. That's normal, that's human, and no reasonable person is silently judging a single off day. What we're talking about here is a general pattern, an overall emotional signature that a space carries over time, not a single afternoon of exhaustion or busyness. The occasional messy day tells no story at all. The consistent pattern over months and years, that's where the real signal lives. There's another layer worth mentioning here, because it explains why this entire topic matters so much more than people initially assume. Environmental psychologists have long understood that spaces don't just reflect our internal state, they actively shape it too. This means the relationship between you and your home isn't one-directional. It's not simply that your emotional state creates your environment. Your environment also reinforces your emotional state in a constant feedback loop. A cluttered, chaotic space can quietly deepen feelings of overwhelm, even when you're not consciously aware it's happening. A warm, intentional, cared-for space can quietly reinforce feelings of calm, self-respect, and stability, even on days when things internally feel a little shaky. This is why so many people describe feeling different, calmer, more like themselves, after even small acts of care toward their living space, tidying one corner, bringing in a plant, softening the lighting in one room. It's not superficial. It's psychological reinforcement working in both directions at once. Consider two versions of the exact same small apartment. In one version, the dishes are piled up for a week. The lighting is one harsh overhead bulb. There's nothing on the walls, and the only sound is the refrigerator humming. In the other version, the same apartment has a single lamp glowing warmly in the corner, a couple of photos taped up near the mirror, one plant that's clearly been watered recently, and something quiet playing in the background. Nothing about the square footage changed. Nothing about the budget changed dramatically either. But the emotional experience of walking into each one is almost entirely different. And that difference is not imagined. It's measurable in how people's bodies respond, their heart rate, their sense of ease, their willingness to relax into the space rather than remain subtly on guard. This is why the impression a man forms in those first few minutes inside your home carries so much more weight than people usually give it credit for. He's not just evaluating your taste in furniture or your cleaning habits. On a much deeper, often entirely unconscious level, he's reading the relationship you have with yourself, reflected outward into the physical space around you. And people, generally speaking, are remarkably accurate at sensing that underlying signal, even when they couldn't explain exactly what tipped them off. There's one more thing worth mentioning here, because it quietly threads through every single point we've covered so far, and that's the difference between a space designed to impress and a space designed to be lived in. You can usually tell within moments which one you've walked into. A space designed to impress feels slightly stiff, like everything has a designated spot it must return to, like touching something might disturb the arrangement. A space designed to be lived in has a different texture entirely. Cushions that show the shape of where someone actually sits. A blanket draped somewhere it was left rather than folded for display. A coffee table with faint rings from mugs set down over time without worry. Neither version is inherently better. Some people genuinely love a highly curated, minimal aesthetic, and that can absolutely still feel warm if it's authentic to them. But the moment a space feels like it exists purely for an audience rather than for the person living in it, something in a visitor's nervous system quietly registers the disconnect, even if they couldn't name exactly what felt slightly hollow about the experience. This distinction matters because it explains why some incredibly beautiful homes still feel strangely uninviting, and why some modest, imperfect homes feel like the most comforting place someone has been in months. Beauty and warmth are not the same thing, even though people often assume they are. Warmth comes from evidence of actual living, actual use, actual presence, layered over time. Beauty can exist entirely on the surface, untouched by any of that. When both exist together, a space becomes truly magnetic. But given a choice between the two, warmth will always leave the deeper, longer-lasting impression, because warmth speaks directly to the nervous system's oldest question, am I safe here, while beauty only speaks to the eye. It's worth pausing here to say something reassuring, because this topic can easily start to feel like pressure, like one more thing to perform correctly. That was never the intention. The truth is, most of what we've talked about today isn't about effort or money, it's about attention. Noticing whether your entryway feels intentional. Noticing whether your lighting feels warm or clinical. Noticing whether you've let a few pieces of your actual life exist visibly in your space, rather than hidden away. These are small, quiet acts of self-respect, and interestingly enough, the byproduct of building a home that genuinely feels good to you is that it will also, without any extra effort, feel good to everyone who walks into it, romantic interest or not. So if there's one thing to take from all of this, let it be this. Building a home that feels warm, intentional, and genuinely yours isn't about performing for anyone who might walk through the door. It's about creating an environment that reinforces the way you actually want to feel every single day, whether anyone else ever sees it or not. When that foundation is real, when the warmth and care in your space comes from an honest place rather than a performance, everyone who steps into it, whether it's someone you're dating, a friend, or family, will feel it, without you ever needing to explain a single thing. And here's the most reassuring part of everything we've discussed today. You don't need an expensive home, a perfectly curated aesthetic, or a magazine-worthy interior to create this kind of impression. You simply need intention, consistency, and a bit of care applied honestly over time. That, more than anything money can buy, is what actually makes a space feel like somewhere someone wants to stay. And in a strange, quiet way, the more you build that kind of home for yourself, the more you start to notice that you feel like a different person inside it too, calmer, steadier, more at home not just in your space, but in yourself. If this gave you a new way of looking at your own space, hit subscribe, because here on Psychology on Love, we talk about exactly this kind of thing every single week. The quiet psychology behind attraction, connection, and the small, often invisible signals that shape how people feel around us. Let me know in the comments which of these signs surprised you the most. I read every single one. And if you know someone who could use a little more warmth in her own home today, send this to her. It might be exactly the nudge she needs. Thank you for watching. Take care of your space, and I'll see you in the next video.